In Victorian London, under the dim gaslight and the steady hum of rain, men once gathered around wooden rings to watch courage measured in pain. No helmets, no gloves, only bare fists and the will to endure. Among them was Jack Riley, a former footman who rose from the slums to become the champion of England. His story is not one of endless victory, but of what comes after the cheering stops. When the crowd faded, when his body broke, and when the prize ring's glory gave way to silence, Jack Riley learned a truth far gentler than any punch could teach, that strength lies not in striking, but in knowing when to lower one's hands. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, let the rain, the old city, and the quiet rhythm of his heart carry you back to that age of courage and consequence. This is Old Worlds for Sleep, and this is the gentle fighter. I can always tell when the weather is about to turn. The air thickens, the knee stiffens, and somewhere in the distance I hear it, the soft tapping of rain against old canvas. It isn't really there, of course. The ring's long gone, the crowd long silent. But my mind keeps the sound alive, like a song I can't stop humming. I sit by the window of my small London room, the lamp throwing a warm circle on the desk. Outside, gaslights shimmer through the drizzle, and the city breathes in slow, tired rhythm. Funny thing about nights like this, they invite memories whether you want them or not. So I speak them aloud, perhaps for you, whoever you are, awake when the rest of the world is asleep. Maybe you'll listen and find a piece of yourself in these recollections. Do you ever listen to the rain and feel time fold upon itself? Do old sounds find their way back to you, uninvited yet familiar, like ghosts who mean no harm? When I was a boy, rain meant work, scrubbing the servants' steps, polishing boots, fetching coal. Back then I was just Riley the footman, small, fast, and forgettable. I thought the world would always look down on me, that my life would remain beneath polished floors and other men's shoes. But one night, in a smoky tavern, a man offered me a chance to fight for coin. I said yes before I'd even thought why. Maybe it was pride, maybe hunger, maybe something deeper. A need to be seen. I remember the smell, ale, wet wool, candle grease. The sound, coins clinking, men laughing, a violin screeching somewhere behind the smoke. When my knuckles first split open, I didn't feel pain, only a kind of awakening. It was as if all the noise of the world gathered in that one moment, cheers, curses, the pounding of blood in my ears, and whispered, "This is what you were born for." People think fighting is chaos, but it isn't. It's rhythm, like the rain. You learn to listen, a breath before a punch, the tremor of the floorboards, the crowd holding air in their throats. Even now, decades later, I still hear it when the night grows quiet. The rhythm of fists, the applause of rain. Have you ever chased something so hard you forgot what you were running from? Fame, perhaps? Or the fear of being nothing at all? Tonight, the city sleeps, but my memories don't. Each drop of rain becomes another round, another crowd, another lesson carved into flesh. I used to think the sound meant victory. Now I know it was simply time, passing, each drop a moment falling away. So if you're still awake, listen closely. That gentle tapping beyond your window might be more than weather. It might be your own memories knocking softly, asking to be let in. Don't turn them away. They've come to keep you company as mine have for me. Because every fighter, every person really spends their life in some kind of ring. And when the rain starts to fall, all we can do is sit, listen, and remember the sound of who we once were. When I was 16, I thought a pair of clean boots could change my fortune. I used to polish them until they shone like mirrors, hoping that somewhere in those reflections I'd see a better version of myself staring back. But no matter how bright the leather gleamed, it never reflected freedom, only servitude. I was a footman then, serving in a townhouse off Piccadilly. We rose before dawn, slept after midnight, and spoke only when spoken to. Every day felt the same: silver trays, soft voices, silent humiliation. You learn to bow not just with your back, but with your spirit. Have you ever lived like that? Nodding, smiling, doing everything right, yet feeling invisible all the same? Sometimes late at night, I'd watch the street boys outside the servants' entrance, barefoot, loud, alive. They had nothing, but they owned themselves. I envied that more than wealth. One evening, after a long day serving wine to men who wouldn't meet my eyes, I wandered toward the East End. It was the kind of night when the fog hangs low and the lamps burn dull yellow, the city half asleep, half awake. Somewhere beyond the docks, I heard shouting, laughter, the rhythmic thud of fists on flesh. Curiosity led me down an alley lined with broken barrels and wet cobblestones until I reached a courtyard lit by lanterns. That was where I saw my first prize fight. Two men stood inside a ring of rope, shirtless under the smoky light. The crowd roared like beasts, their faces half hidden by drink and darkness. Every punch landed like thunder, each drop of blood catching the glow of the lanterns before falling into the mud. It was brutal, beautiful, honest in a way the drawing rooms of Mayfair never were. A man beside me, tall and broad, noticed how I watched. "You fight, lad?" he asked. I shook my head. He smiled, a grin that knew the world's hunger. "Best way out of servitude is through a man's jaw. You've got the shoulders for it." He gave me a name, a place, and a promise. "Turn up next week. You might earn more in one night than you make in a month." I remember walking back to the townhouse with my heart hammering harder than any punch could strike. All night, I lay awake, hearing again the cheers, the gasps, the dull rhythm of bone-meeting flesh. It sounded like freedom. Would you have gone? Would you have traded safety for a chance, just a chance, to matter? I didn't think twice. The next week, I left my post early, slipping away before the master returned. The alley was the same, the ring smaller than I remembered, the faces rougher. When they handed me the wraps, just strips of linen still sticky from the last fight, I realized what I'd agreed to. I wasn't a servant anymore. I was a spectacle. The man I fought was older, stronger, a butcher by trade. The first blow nearly took my breath. The second sent stars dancing before my eyes. But then something shifted. Pain sharpened me. Every instinct, every suppressed scream from my years below stairs turned into movement. Step, a swing, a strike. When he fell, the crowd erupted. Someone tossed a coin that hit my chest and rolled to the ground. It glittered like salvation. That was the night I learned two truths. First, that the world doesn't hand you dignity, you have to seize it even if it draws blood. And second, that once you've tasted power, even for a moment, you can never go back to being invisible. I walked home bruised, half drunk on adrenaline. When the mistress asked why my cheek was swollen, I told her I'd slipped on the kitchen steps. She didn't believe me, but she didn't care either. By the next weekend, I was back in the ring. Every coin I earned went into a tin box beneath my bed. Every scar became proof that I existed. I stopped fearing pain. I began to crave it, the way it stripped away pretense, leaving only truth. Sometimes I wonder, listening friend, do you remember your first act of rebellion? The moment you realized your life belonged to you and no one else? It might not have been a punch. Perhaps it was a word, a choice, a refusal. But I think we all have that moment, the one that divides who we were from who we're meant to be. That night, as I cleaned the blood from my knuckles and watched it swirl down the basin, I felt lighter. Not happier, not safer, just real. And for the first time in my life, the reflection staring back at me wasn't a servant's face. It was a fighter's. London was never kind, but it always had a way of giving a man exactly what he asked for, just not how he imagined it. By the time I'd fought 5 matches in the East End, the bruises had stopped mattering. I'd grown used to the taste of copper on my tongue, the blur of faces in the lamplight, the smell of sweat and sawdust. Each victory brought me a few more coins and a little more courage. But courage is a dangerous thing when you don't yet understand its cost. The crowds grew larger, the purses heavier, and my name began to echo from one smoky tavern to another. Not Jack Riley the footman, but Riley the fighter. That simple change of name felt like rebirth. Yet, with every round, I could sense London watching, testing, weighing whether I was worth remembering. One evening, after a particularly brutal match near Whitechapel, a man waited for me outside. He wore a long coat, the kind gentleman favored, though his face belonged more to the alleys than the clubs. "Name's Ned Clark," he said, offering a hand rough from years of work. "You fight like a man who's got something to prove." I remember wiping the blood from my lip before shaking his hand. "I do," I told him. "Everything." Ned laughed, a deep, broken sound. "Then maybe I can help you prove it." He said he trained prize fighters. Men who fought not just for beer money but for titles, for recognition. He spoke of real bouts, rings with ropes, crowds that paid in gold rather than half-drunk cheers. For a moment I thought he was mocking me. But then he reached into his coat and handed me a card, ink smudged, edges worn. "Clark and Company, boxing instruction and arrangements. Come to the gym in Lambeth tomorrow," he said. "We'll see what you're made of." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, hearing again the crowd's roar, the solid thud of my last punch. Could it really be more than a street game? Could a man like me rise from the basements of service to the headlines of the sporting pages? Tell me, listener, have you ever stood at the edge of change and felt both terrified and alive? That trembling between hope and disbelief, that's what keeps a man breathing when everything else tells him to stop. The next morning I found Ned's gym. It was nothing grand, just a converted warehouse filled with the smell of linseed oil and stale tobacco. Ropes hung from the ceiling, punching bags stitched from old canvas swayed in the draft, and the floorboards groaned like old bones underfoot. He put me through a series of tests: speed, endurance, control. I failed half of them. But what caught his attention wasn't my technique, it was my refusal to stop. After an hour, he tossed me a towel and said, "You've got fight in you, but fight alone won't make you a champion. You'll have to learn discipline." The word felt foreign in my mouth. Discipline. I'd spent my life obeying others. Now I had to obey myself. For months, Ned drilled me. We trained before sunrise when fog still hugged the river. I learned to breathe through pain, to read an opponent's shoulders rather than his fists, to see patterns in chaos. He taught me the science behind each punch, the pivot of the foot, the angle of the wrist, the whisper of air before impact. "You win with your head, not your hands," he'd say. "Hands break. Strategy doesn't." Do you have someone who once believed in you before you believed in yourself? Someone who saw not who you were, but who you could be. That was Ned for me. He didn't flatter, didn't comfort. He forged me the way a blacksmith tempers steel, with fire and blows and patience. Soon, small-time promoters began to notice. Holmes was one of them, a man whose smile had sharp edges. He spoke softly, always called me lad, and talked about opportunities beyond the East End. "London needs a new champion," he said one night. "A man with grit and manners. You could be that man." It sounded like destiny. I wanted to believe it was. But London's promises are written in smoke. They shimmer, they seduce, and they vanish the moment you reach for them. Still I followed. I let Holmes arrange my fights, let Ned shape my training, and for the first time I felt the future gathering speed. When I walked home through the fog, the city lights looked like burning coals floating in mist. Every echo of a carriage wheel became applause in my imagination. Every gust of wind felt like fate whispering, "Keep going." And perhaps, if you're listening now with your eyes half closed, you know that feeling too. The sense that something vast is just ahead, waiting for you to step into it. It's beautiful, it's dangerous, and it changes everything. There's a rhythm to pain. At first it's chaos, raw, wild, senseless. But if you endure long enough, it begins to take shape, like a drumbeat under your skin. That's how I learned the code of the prize ring. Not from books or gentlemen's rules, but from the steady pulse of pain that demanded respect. The first time I fought under proper regulations, I remember the morning air thick with coal smoke. The crowd gathered in a meadow outside the city, men in flat caps and coarse coats, women with shawls pulled tight against the chill. Holmes, my new manager, stood beside me, speaking in that calm, slippery tone of his. "Keep your composure, lad. Smile when they announce your name. The papers are here." I didn't smile. I couldn't. My stomach twisted tighter than the ropes around the ring post. Across from me stood my opponent, a broad man from Manchester named Duffy, all shoulders and scars. He looked as if he'd been carved out of stone and regret. The referee, wearing a bowler hat far too fine for the occasion, recited the rules. No hitting below the belt, no gouging, no wrestling after a fall. It all sounded civilized until the first punch landed. Then civilization disappeared. I can still hear it, the sound of fist meeting flesh, the cheer that followed, the sudden quiet that comes when pain sharpens your senses instead of dulling them. It wasn't fear I felt. There was clarity. Each movement, each breath, each heartbeat became precise. There was no room for thought, only instinct, a dialogue between courage and survival. When Duffy fell in the 11th round, the crowd roared so loud it shook the trees. Someone lifted me onto their shoulders, and for a moment I could see the whole field, a sea of faces, drunk on victory that wasn't entirely theirs. It struck me then, a fighter never wins alone. He carries with him the hunger of everyone watching, every man who's ever felt powerless. You fight for them as much as for yourself. Have you ever been cheered by strangers who didn't know your name a week before? It's a strange kind of love, fierce, fleeting, and utterly intoxicating. Holmes was delighted, of course. By evening, my name was in the papers. Jack Riley, the Gentleman Bruiser. I didn't understand the title then, the way it played to both sides of London's soul. To the working class, I was one of their own made good. To the upper crust, I was proof that even brutality could be polished into art. But the code, the real code, wasn't written in newsprint or announced in meadows. It lived in the unspoken pact between fighters. You never quit. You never cheat. You face pain with dignity, defeat with silence. You treat your opponent as mirror and measure, the man who shows you what you truly are. One evening, after another brutal victory, Ned handed me a cloth for my bleeding knuckles and said, "You're learning, lad. But remember, courage without restraint turns to madness." I nodded, though I didn't yet grasp his meaning. How could I? When the crowd calls your name, restraint feels like cowardice. Holmes, meanwhile, was already thinking of bigger fights, longer purses, riskier bets. He'd grin that fox's grin of his and talk about legacy, about making history. I wanted to believe him. It's easy to trust the man who tells you you're destined for greatness. Harder to realize he's selling your pain by the pound. Still, I followed the path laid before me. Each match tougher, each victory sweeter. With every bruise I wore, I gained another layer of armor, not just on my skin but around my heart. London began to whisper my name. Jack Riley, the man who never fell. Jack Riley, the fighter who smiled through blood. Sometimes, late at night, Ned would pour a drink and say, "Don't let them make you a story before you're done living it." I'd laugh it off. But he was right, of course. Every legend starts as a man. And every man, once praised enough, begins to forget he bleeds like everyone else. Do you know that feeling? The moment success begins to blur the edges of who you were? When pride feels less like a sin and more like armor. That's how it begins, the slow, silent unraveling that no applause can drown out. The code of the prize ring wasn't about winning. It was about knowing when to stand, when to fall, and when to walk away. I didn't understand that then, but I would. And the lesson would cost more than any trophy ever earned. London changes its face at night. By day, it's a machine of clattering carriages and shouting traders. But after sundown, it exhales. The fog thickens, the gaslights bloom like pale flowers, and the city becomes a dream that smells of coal, gin, and ambition. That was the London I came to know. The one that carried my name from alley to arena. They said my fights brought crowds big enough to stop traffic on Holborn Hill. I remember stepping out of the carriage once, yes, a carriage, and hearing people chant, "Riley, Riley," as if I were royalty. Funny, isn't it? A servant turned spectacle, a man once invisible now bathed in the light of 1,000 shouting throats. But light always casts a shadow, and I was beginning to learn where mine lived. Holmes handled everything now, the bookings, the money, the papers. He said a fighter shouldn't bother with ledgers, only fists. And I believed him because I wanted to. I wanted the dream to keep expanding. The ringside cheers, the newspaper sketches, the silk robes that made me feel like something more than the boy who once polished other men's boots. Do you know that feeling, listener? When success feels fragile, like holding a candle in the wind. You learn to guard it carefully even when the wax burns your fingers. The fights grew grander, crueler. Sometimes we travel outside London to old barns or fields beyond the city, where crowds gathered in the cold to watch men break each other for glory. It wasn't sport to them, it was theater. They wanted pain dressed in honor, blood wrapped in courage. And I gave them both. I remember one fight near Reading, the air thick with smoke and ale, the crowd pressed so close I could see their teeth when they roared. My opponent, a miner named Corbett, was built like the walls of the pit he worked in. He swung with the desperation of a man who'd known hunger too long. By round 20, neither of us looked human anymore. Every breath burned. Every movement came from something deeper than will. When he fell, the crowd erupted. I didn't raise my hands. I just stared at the blood on my chest and thought, this is what victory looks like. Afterward, Holmes clapped me on the back and called it art. Ned wrapped my hands in silence. Only later, as the adrenaline faded, did I realize one of my fingers no longer bent properly. A small price, I told myself. But every victory leaves its tax. Soon, I couldn't walk through the city without someone recognizing me. Children pointed. Men nodded with respect. Women smiled with curiosity, though their husbands frowned. The papers called me the Gentleman Bruiser, a phrase Holmes loved to repeat at every dinner table as if he'd coined it himself. He began taking me to clubs where men wore polished boots and pretended to be fascinated by the sport. They'd shake my hand, test the calluses, and say things like, "Quite the specimen, isn't he?" I smiled because that's what a man does when he realizes he's both admired and owned. Still, I can't deny the thrill of it all. The applause, the light, the moment the referee's hand lifted mine, it filled a hole inside me I hadn't known was there. I told myself I was proving something to the world. But truly, I was trying to prove something to the boy I used to be. Have you ever looked at your reflection and seen both pride and guilt staring back at once? It's a hard mirror to face. Each victory brought money and fame, but also something else, a quiet ache that lingered after the crowd's roar faded. Ned saw it. He didn't speak of it, but I caught the look in his eyes when he cleaned my cuts. A kind of sorrow only old fighters understand. One night, after a win that left my jaw numb for days, Ned poured us both a drink. "Enjoy this while it lasts," he said softly. "The crowd loves a champion until he limps." I laughed then, not because it was funny, but because I was afraid it might be true. Holmes dismissed Ned's warnings, of course. He talked of bigger matches, international bouts, men from America, France. "The world's your ring now, lad," he'd say, his eyes glittering with more greed than pride. And maybe I wanted to believe that too. Maybe we all do, that the fight will never end, that the body will always obey, that glory can last forever. But glory has a habit of slipping through your fingers just when you think you've learned how to hold it. I didn't know it then, but the first cracks were already forming, tiny invisible fractures in bone, trust, and fate. And beneath all the cheers, something darker was beginning to whisper. Every rise demands its fall. There's a silence that follows victory, a silence so deep it hums inside your bones. It comes after the cheers fade, after the hands stop clapping, after the lights dim and the crowd scatters into the fog. That's when you start hearing yourself again. And sometimes what you hear isn't triumph, it's warning. My warning came the night I fought Miller. A towering brute from Leeds, known for fists like hammers and a smile that never reached his eyes. The papers called it the match of the year. Holmes called it our fortune. I called it inevitable. By then I'd been fighting for years. The pain was constant, a dull ache that settled into my joints like an old tenant refusing to leave. Each fight demanded more of me, and my body had begun sending quiet protests. The right knee that sometimes locked without warning. The hands that throbbed when the weather turned. I ignored them all. A champion doesn't limp. The morning of the fight, London felt hushed. Even the carriages moved slower. I remember wrapping my hands in the small room behind the stage, Ned standing silently by the door. He'd been quiet all week. "You don't look right," he said finally. I smiled to hide the truth. "Don't worry, Ned. Once the bell rings, I'll forget everything else." He shook his head. "That's what I'm afraid of." The first few rounds went as expected. Hard, measured, brutal. Miller was relentless but predictable. I found my rhythm, my confidence. Then, in the eighth, something shifted. I stepped wrong. A small twist, barely noticeable, until the pain hit. White-hot, blinding. My right knee buckled. I heard a sound that didn't belong in the human body, a sharp, wet crack. Everything slowed. The crowd's roar faded to a distant echo. I remember falling, not from the punch, but from betrayal, my own leg refusing to obey. The referee counted. I couldn't rise. Not because I was beaten, but because the machine that had carried me this far had finally broken. Have you ever felt your life change in a single second? Not gradually, not with warning, just snap and the world you knew is gone? That was my second. Ned and Holmes helped me from the ring. Holmes cursed under his breath, more at the loss of money than at my injury. At the doctor's office later that night, I stared at the ceiling while they pressed and prodded my knee. "Ligament torn," they said. "Maybe permanent." I heard the words, but they didn't feel real. I'd survived 100 blows to the head, dozens to the ribs, but this quiet, invisible wound would be the one to end me. For weeks I couldn't walk without a cane. The swelling refused to go down. Every time I tried to stand straight, pain shot through me like lightning. I hid it from Holmes, from the public, even from myself. Champions heal. That's what I kept telling everyone. But at night, when the laudanum wore off, I lay awake and listened to the creak of my own weakness. Holmes began pressuring me within days. The papers wanted a rematch. Miller's backers were offering double the purse. "It's perfect, lad," he said, waving the contract. "You beat him once, you'll do it again. London loves a comeback." I stared at him, incredulous. "The knee's ruined," I said. One wrong move and I'll never walk again. Holmes only smiled thinly. Then don't move wrong. That was the moment I saw him clearly, not as a manager, but as a vulture in a gentleman's coat. He didn't see Jack Riley the man. He saw Jack Riley the investment. The body that could still fill his pockets if it held together a few fights longer. Ned argued with him, bless him. Told him to call it off to give me time. Holmes laughed. The public won't wait. Champions don't rest, they reign. That night, Ned brought me a bottle of whiskey and a name. Walter Tanner, a bone setter who worked the docks. Not a proper doctor, Ned said, but he's helped men worse off than you. I went the next morning, hobbling through rain to Tanner's workshop. He looked more craftsman than healer, big hands, sharp eyes, voice calm as a preacher's. After examining the knee, he said, you've torn the cruciate. It won't heal right, but we can teach the muscles around it to carry the load. He built me a brace of bandages and wood, crude but clever. It let me walk again, not perfectly but enough to pretend. And so I pretended. I trained lightly. I smiled for the newspapers. I told Holmes I was ready. But deep down, I knew one bad turn, one wrong step, and everything would collapse. Have you ever kept going, knowing it might destroy you, simply because you didn't know who you'd be if you stopped? That's what fighting had become for me. Not choice, not passion, survival. I wasn't fighting men anymore. I was fighting time. And time, as every fighter learns, always wins. When the pain became familiar, I thought I'd mastered it. That's the danger with suffering. It starts to feel like a companion. You stop fearing it, and in doing so, you let it rule you. Weeks passed, my knee still swollen beneath its bandage. I walked with a cane now, though I'd hide it whenever Holmes visited. He never liked weakness. Not in his fighters, not in his investments. And make no mistake, that's what I'd become to him. An investment. Holmes arrived one gray afternoon, reeking of cigars and satisfaction. He dropped a newspaper on my table, the headline bold. Riley to defend his title against Miller. London awaits the showdown. I stared at it, feeling my stomach sink. I haven't agreed to this, I said. You will, Holmes replied easily, once you see the numbers. The purse alone could buy you a house in Chelsea. I laughed bitterly. What good is a house if I can't climb the stairs? He waved the remark away. Doctors always exaggerate. You're a fighter, Riley. Pain's part of your trade. Pain, I thought. He said it like it was a currency. Ned was there, silent in the corner, his jaw tight. He'd warned Holmes to wait, but men like Holmes don't listen to warnings, only profit. When I refused to sign, he leaned forward, voice soft and poisonous. The people expect it, lad. You pull out now and they'll call you a coward. Every paper, every tavern, they'll turn on you. I felt my pulse throb against the brace. So I fight half crippled just to keep their approval? To keep your name, he corrected. Without the ring, you're no one. That struck deeper than any punch, because I feared he might be right. Have you ever clung to something long after it stopped loving you back? It's a hard thing to admit, when the dream you bled for starts bleeding you dry. After Holmes left, Ned sat beside me, silent for a long while. He's a vulture, he said at last. Would rather see you crippled than lose his cut. What choice do I have? I asked. If I walk away now, I'm finished. Ned scratched at his stubble. There's a man I know, he said. Not a real doctor, but he's helped dock workers mend worse than this. Maybe he can do what Holmes won't, help you heal. That man, Walter Tanner, had already done all he could. He'd warned me the joint would never be whole again. But hearing Ned's tone, that fragile hope beneath his gruffness, I nodded anyway. Then I'll see him again. The next few weeks blurred into pain and stubbornness. I trained lightly, shadow boxing, pretending to be strong. Holmes sent letters, then threats. The public waits, Riley. They've placed their bets. He always mentioned the bets, but not who was making them. It was Ned who found out first. He came one evening, pale as chalk. Holmes has wagered against you, he said. I froze. What? Through middlemen, of course. He's betting you'll lose, betting big. If you fight, he wins either way. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. All those years, all that loyalty, and I was just another hand he'd play at the table. Have you ever realized that the person guiding you was leading you straight toward ruin? It's like waking mid-fall, only to find there's no ground below. The next morning, I limped to Holmes's club. He was there, as always, surrounded by smoke and laughter, men in waistcoats congratulating each other on fortunes made from other men's suffering. He looked genuinely surprised to see me. "Riley," he said smoothly, "come to discuss the arrangements?" "Come to discuss your bets," I answered. The laughter around us died. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "I diversify my interests," he said. "A sensible businessman must hedge his losses." "You call gambling against your own fighter sensible?" He shrugged. "I call it survival." I took a step closer, my cane striking the polished floor. "You set me up to lose," I said quietly. "To fall in front of all London." Holmes smiled, that same empty smile he wore at every press meeting. "You'll still get paid. And if you lose gracefully, you'll still have your name." That's when I saw it, the truth naked beneath his civility. He never cared about boxing or honor or me. Only the coins that clinked when my blood hit the canvas. I leaned on my cane, looked him square in the eye. "Release me," I said. "Cancel the fight. Pay what you owe. And tell the papers I retired because of injury, not fear." He hesitated. "You'd ruin your own legend for this?" "No," I said. "You already ruined it for me." For a long moment we just stared at each other, the smoke between us curling like a fuse. Then, perhaps sensing the danger to his reputation, he agreed. The settlement wasn't generous, but it was freedom. When I left that club, the rain had started, soft, steady, cleansing. That night, I slept without dreams for the first time in months. I wasn't a champion anymore. But for the first time since I'd lifted my fists, I wasn't owned. Tell me, listener, if you had to choose between glory and peace, which would you take? The roar of the crowd, or the quiet that comes when you finally stop fighting? I didn't know it then, but peace is the hardest victory to earn. The morning after I signed the papers, London didn't sound the same. No distant cheers, no rumble of crowds on their way to the ring. Only the soft patter of rain against the window, and the slow tick of a clock that had suddenly found its voice again. That's how silence feels when your life has been made of noise, heavy, absolute, honest. I sat there for hours, staring at the contract on the table. Holmes had written his name with elegant cruelty, each letter slanted like a blade. My own signature looked small beside it. Jack Riley, former champion. 2 words that turned a lifetime into a memory. When Ned arrived that afternoon, he didn't say much. He just poured 2 glasses of ale and slid one toward me. "To what's next?" he said. "What is next?" I asked. He shrugged. "That's for you to find out." He was right, of course. The ring had given me everything, and taken everything back. Without it, I was a man without shape, like a shadow without the sun. Have you ever lost something so defining that you no longer knew who you were without it? It's a strange kind of grief, one that doesn't cry, just quietly erases the edges of your days. For the first week, I did nothing. I watched the fog drift across the rooftops, the lamplighters move like ghosts through the mist. Sometimes I'd hear the distant echo of applause in my head and almost believe it was real. Then I'd move, and the ache in my knee would remind me it was not. London kept moving, of course. It always does. The same papers that once printed my victories now carried new names, new faces. Bennett, Miller, Cooper. All of them chasing the same fleeting thunder I'd once held in my hands. One evening, Reynolds, the boxing historian, came calling. He brought whiskey and sympathy, both poured in equal measure. "I heard about Holmes," he said softly. "You heard about everyone," I replied. He smiled. "Occupational hazard." We drank, and I told him what had happened. The knee, the betrayal, the release. He listened in silence, nodding like a priest hearing confession. When I was done, he opened a small leather notebook and slid it across the table. Inside were pages of names, dates, and faded ink sketches. Fighters I'd known, men who'd risen and fallen before me. "I'm writing about them," he said. "The champions, the forgotten. Their lives after the ring." He hesitated, then added, "You'd be surprised how few survive the ending." That word, ending, settled in my chest like a weight. He was right. Most of us didn't plan for what came next because we never believed there was a next. We thought the crowd's roar was forever. It never is. I looked through his notes, stories of men who had once been gods of the canvas. Now bartenders, debtors, beggars. Some dead before 40. A few drunk before noon. A handful lucky enough to train others for pennies a lesson. All of them haunted by echoes. Reynolds sipped his drink. "You could help me write it," he said. "Tell it from the inside. A fighter's truth." I laughed softly. Do fighters have truths? Or just excuses? He shook his head. Every scar tells the truth, Riley. People just need someone to translate it. That night, after he left, I sat by the window long after the lamps burned low. The rain had stopped, but the city still wept in its way, droplets falling from the eaves, the distant wail of a train. I thought about what he'd said. Maybe that was what I could do now, turn bruises into words. If the ring had been my stage, perhaps my pen could be my corner. Do you believe in second acts, listener? That a man can begin again after the world has already written his ending? I wasn't sure. But for the first time in weeks, the thought didn't frighten me. The next day, I walked to the pub where the old fighters gathered. When Jenkins from Bristol saw me, he raised his glass. "The champ," he roared. I almost corrected him, but stopped. He wasn't toasting the title. He was toasting survival. We shared stories, some funny, some broken. And when they asked what I'd do next, I told them I might write about us. The table fell quiet for a moment. Then Jenkins nodded. "Do it," he said. "Tell them what it costs." That night I returned home, pulled out an old notebook and stared at the blank page. It felt like stepping into a ring again, terrifying, electric, full of possibility. The pen trembled in my hand. Not from pain this time, but from purpose. And as I began to write, the silence of retirement shifted. No longer emptiness, but peace. A quieter kind of fight. It was strange walking into a ring again. Not to fight, but to teach. The ropes looked the same, the smell of sweat and chalk hung in the air. Yet everything felt softer, quieter, civilized. This wasn't the smoke-filled chaos of the East End. This was the Queensberry Academy, where the sons of noblemen came to learn the noble art of self-defense. I'd met Lord Queensberry himself a week before. He'd read about my retirement, about my writing with Reynolds, and invited me to his club. Polished wood velvet chairs, voices that never rose above polite laughter. It was a world I'd only ever glimpsed from the servant's doorway. He told me he wished to reform boxing, to turn it from brawling into something respectable, scientific. And he wanted me, Jack Riley, former prize ring champion, to help him do it. At first I thought it was a joke. Me teaching dukes and officers how to punch without dirtying their gloves? But then I saw the sincerity in his eyes. And more than that, the opportunity. Boxing must evolve, he said. It cannot remain the sport of blood and broken men. It must become a discipline. A discipline. The word stayed with me. Perhaps that was what I needed too, discipline for the rest of my life. A rhythm to replace the chaos. The first class began on a fog-drenched morning. Young men in fine shirts, laughing nervously, their soft hands wrapped in clean linen. I stood before them with my cane and my crooked smile. "Gentlemen," I said, "you came to learn how to strike. But before you strike, you must learn how to stand." They thought it would be easy. It never is. Within 10 minutes they were sweating, panting, their pride cracking faster than their posture. I corrected them gently, the way Ned once corrected me. Elbows tucked in, weight balanced, breathe through pain, not against it. Pain, I told them, is a teacher. It does not lie. Have you ever had to guide someone through a path you once barely survived? It's a strange feeling, both pride and pity mingled into one. Among my students was a young officer, Lord Harrington. Eager, serious, with the kind of focus I'd only ever seen in real fighters. One day after class he lingered. "I read about your match against Bennett," he said. "That counter in round 19, was it true you broke your hand landing it?" I smiled. "True enough. And worth it." He nodded with quiet awe. "You must miss it." "Sometimes," I said. "But missing something doesn't mean you should return to it." That evening, as I walked home along the river, I realized how right that sounded and how much it still hurt to admit. The water shimmered under the gaslight like liquid iron, and I thought of the men still out there fighting, their bodies breaking for cheers that fade before dawn. I wanted to believe this new version of boxing, gloved, timed, proper, would save them from that fate. But deep down, I knew pain never disappears. It only changes its shape. Do you ever wonder if progress truly heals what came before, or merely hides it beneath finer fabric? As weeks turned into months, I found myself enjoying the work more than I'd expected. The academy became a refuge, a place where I could pass on skill without blood, where the ring no longer demanded pieces of my body in exchange for its respect. The gentlemen respected me too, perhaps more than they should have. To them, I was a relic of a world they romanticized. A man who had looked brutality in the eye and survived. They asked about the old days, and I told them just enough to feed their imagination. Never the full truth, the smells, the fear, the sound of bones breaking like wood in frost. Sometimes after class, Lord Queensberry himself would visit. He'd watch the students spar with a thoughtful expression, then take me aside. "I'm drafting a new set of rules," he said. "Rounds, gloves, timed rest, structure. Would you look them over?" And so I did. With every revision, boxing became less a brawl and more a performance. Safer perhaps, but not gentler. One day I told him, "Gloves will protect hands, not heads. Men will throw more punches to the skull because they can. The wounds will move from skin to brain." He looked startled. "Do you truly believe that?" "I know it," I said. "Pain finds a way." He didn't argue, just nodded as if storing the warning somewhere he'd never open again. That night I sat at my desk, the lamplight catching the ink stains on my fingers, and realized that I'd done it. I had found my second ring. No crowds, no blood, just words and students and the slow, quiet pride of teaching others how not to make the same mistakes. Tell me, listener, have you ever found peace not by forgetting your past, but by finally making sense of it? That's what this was for me. Not redemption, not glory, just understanding. And perhaps in the end, that's the greatest victory a fighter can claim. The students never noticed my hand tremble when I tied the wraps. They saw the stance, the calm instruction, the polished composure, not the flicker beneath the surface. But I felt it. A faint shiver that ran from wrist to shoulder, like an old echo of every punch I'd ever thrown. At first, I told myself it was nothing. A chill. Fatigue. Then came the headaches, sharp, sudden flashes of white that made the room tilt. They passed quickly, but left behind a strange fog, as though part of me had wandered off and forgotten the way back. Have you ever felt your own mind hesitate as if memory itself were limping? It's a frightening thing, realizing the body you once commanded now has thoughts of its own. Ned noticed first. We still met every Thursday at the Fighting Cock's Inn, his hands as gnarled as mine, his laughter stubborn against time. "You're quieter these days," he said one evening. "Thinking or forgetting?" "Both," I answered. He smiled sadly. "All fighters start forgetting. Sometimes it's mercy." I wanted to believe that. But mercy never came easy to men like us. The pain grew stranger. Not sharp, but dull, a hum beneath the skull. Some mornings, words hid from me. I'd reach for a name, a place, a memory, and find only smoke. Once, while teaching, I called a student by the wrong name 3 times. He laughed, I didn't. That night, I sat alone in my room, staring at my reflection. The lamp trembled slightly on the table, or maybe it was my hand. The face staring back was mine, but thinner, wearier. Lines carved deep by years of effort and impact. I touched the scar above my eye and wondered how many stories hid inside that thin strip of skin. Do you ever think about what your body remembers that your mind forgets? I think mine remembers everything. One afternoon, Lord Queensberry invited me to his study. He'd been working on a public presentation, a defense of boxing as a civilized art. "I'd like you to attend," he said. "Your presence gives it legitimacy." A man who's seen both worlds. I hesitated. The old world hasn't left me, my lord. It just moved inside my head. He didn't understand, of course. How could he? For him, boxing was philosophy. For me, it was ghosts. During the lecture, as he spoke of controlled strength and disciplined courage, I looked at the portraits on the wall, ancestors in powdered wigs, and wondered what they'd think of men like me teaching their descendants to punch. My vision blurred for a moment, the edges softening until the faces melted together. When I blinked, they seemed to be watching me, not judging, just remembering. Later that night, I wrote in my journal, "There are ghosts beneath the gloves, and they speak in tremors." It's odd, I used to fear silence, the absence of applause. Now, I fear sound, the ringing in my ears that never quite stops. The echo of the crowd that exists only in memory. Ned told me once that fighting was like spending coins from the same purse. Every blow, every round, another coin gone. When the purse is empty, you can't buy back what's been spent. I think I finally understood him. Still, I kept teaching. Because what else was there? When I saw a student land a clean strike, when I watched his fear turn to discipline, I felt something close to grace. Pain can birth purpose, if you let it. Have you ever taken something that once broke you and turned it into something that heals others? It doesn't erase the past, but it gives it meaning. And meaning, I think, is the last refuge of the broken. The tremors come and go now. The headaches too. Sometimes I forget where I placed my cane or whether I locked the door. But when I step onto the gym floor, everything aligns again. My body remembers what my mind forgets: how to breathe, how to stand, how to endure. At night, when I can't sleep, I open the window. London hums below, carriages clattering, voices fading into fog. I breathe it in and think, I'm still here. A little slower, a little duller, but still here. And maybe that's enough. If you're listening now, perhaps you felt it too. The quiet persistence of a body that refuses to give up even as time demands it. Don't fear that persistence. It's proof that you're still in the ring, even if the world believes you've stepped out. Some mornings I wake before the light. The city hasn't yet found its voice, and London lies half asleep beneath the fog. It's the only time I can think clearly, before the noise returns, before the echoes begin. Names drift through my head like feathers. Bennett, Miller, Jenkins, Allen. Sometimes I can still see their faces, other times only the shape of their shadows. It's a peculiar thing, memory. You think you own it until you realize it's been renting space in you all along. And one day, without warning, it begins to move out. The first time it happened, I was speaking with a student, a bright young fellow from Cambridge. We were discussing stance, and I wanted to show him how Bennett used to feint before striking. But when I reached for the name, it vanished. There was a pause, short but sharp as a punch. The student didn't notice. He just nodded politely as I stumbled through an explanation. But afterward, I sat down breathless, not from effort, but from the quiet terror of forgetting a man who once defined me. Have you ever lost a memory so suddenly it felt like losing a friend? It's like reaching out your hand to greet someone and finding only air. Ned says it's natural. Brains get tired same as knees, he told me once, half smiling over his pint. Yours just took more hits than most. We laughed because laughter still feels like defiance. But when he left that night, I lingered at the table, staring at the rings his glass left on the wood. 3 perfect circles fading one by one, just like names. I started writing them down after that, all the men I fought, all the places I'd been. Some pages are clean and detailed, others are filled with blanks, like a battlefield map after the smoke clears. Bennett, Thompson, Corbett, Tom Sayers. That last one hurt to write. He was the man who showed me how to walk away before the ring consumed me. He died young, 39 I think. But I still hear his voice sometimes. Know when to stop fighting, lad. That's the hardest lesson. Sometimes I wonder if I've learned it yet. The nights are the worst. When the world quiets, the echoes come. Not sounds exactly, but impressions. The faint clap of the crowd, the crack of gloves, the wet breath of the fog over the Thames after a fight. I'll wake with my hand clenched, heart pounding as if the bell's about to ring. Then I'll remember, it's years behind me now. All of it. Do you dream of old battles too? Not just the ones you fought with your hands, but the ones inside your mind? The choices, the regrets, the words left unsaid? They visit me like old sparring partners, relentless, patient, waiting for me to drop my guard. One morning, I couldn't remember Ned's last name. I'd known him half my life, fought under his training, trusted him more than anyone. And yet, the syllables slipped away like smoke. It came back later, of course, Clark, but in those few minutes, I felt hollow as though part of me had gone missing with it. I told Reynolds about it that evening. He listened carefully, then said, "Write faster." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Your memories are leaking, Jack. The only way to save them is to pour them out faster than they fade." He was right. So I wrote, every night, every hour I could steal from sleep. The ink stained my fingers. The words grew smaller and smaller until the pages looked like whispers pressed onto paper. But it helped. Each sentence became a small act of preservation, a way to keep the ghosts in order. Sometimes, when I read the pages back, I can almost feel the fights again. The weight of the air, the burn of the crowd's breath, the rhythm of my heartbeat against the world's. It's not the same as living it, but it's close enough to make peace with the distance. And that's what aging really is, isn't it? A slow negotiation with distance. Between who you were and who you've become. Between the names you remember and the ones you've already lost. Tonight, as I write this, the candle burns low. The city hums softly outside, a lullaby of wheels and whispers. I close my notebook and rest my hands on its cover. The tremor has returned, faint but constant, my body's metronome. I find it strangely comforting. Proof that I'm still here. Still remembering even as memory itself fades. If you're listening, perhaps you know what I mean. That tender ache of remembering and forgetting all at once. Hold on to your names while you can. Say them aloud sometimes, even to the dark. Keeps them alive. Because when the echoes fade, what remains isn't glory or pain. It's the simple sound of your own voice, still calling out into the quiet. The gym is quieter now. The young men still come, of course, all polished boots and restless pride. But their voices echo differently. Maybe it's the walls that have grown older, or maybe it's me. I no longer bark commands. I speak softly and they listen closer. Funny how age teaches you that whispering often carries farther than shouting. Most of them don't know who I was. To them, I'm just an old instructor with a cane and stories that sound like legends. Sometimes one of the new boys will ask, "Did you really fight with bare knuckles, sir?" And I'll smile. Not bare. I always had the crowd to protect me. They laugh, not realizing how true that line really is. Have you ever stood in the same place you once conquered and realized it's moved on without you? It doesn't hurt as much as you'd think. It just feels still. The ring itself has changed. The canvas is cleaner, the ropes tighter, the smell less of blood and more of chalk. When I step onto it now, I feel like I'm walking through a memory remade in gentler light. Each creak of the floorboard carries ghost. The sound of gloves meeting flesh. The echo of a crowd long dispersed. Sometimes I teach without touching. I point, I demonstrate with words, not fists. Keep your guard high, but your heart higher, I tell them. They smile, thinking it's poetry. It's not. It's survival. One of the lads, Harrington, the same who once asked about my old fights, comes to visit even on days he doesn't train. He sits beside me while I rest between lessons. "I read your columns," he says. "You write like a man at peace." I chuckle. "That's the trick, lad. Writing peace is easier than living it." He asks me about fear. "Did you ever feel it in the ring?" "Every time," I tell him. "The bravest thing a man can do isn't to fight without fear. It's to keep swinging while fear sits on his shoulder, whispering the odds." He nods quietly, and for a moment, I see a reflection of myself in him. Younger, surer, not yet aware of how long a lifetime can be. Outside, the city hums like an old lullaby. London never sleeps, only changes its rhythm. From the window of the academy, I can see the fog rolling in off the Thames, thick and soft as wool. It swallows the streets, the carriages, the gas lamps. The same fog that once watched me climb from footman to fighter, and now watches me fade back into quiet. Reynolds visited last week, older but still sharp-eyed. He brought a stack of proofs, the final edition of his book, The Noble Art, A History of Prize Fighting. My name sits on the cover, smaller than his, but still there, Jack Riley, contributor. He poured us each a glass of whiskey and said, "You've done more than fight, Jack. You've remembered." And I think perhaps that's what history really is. A man trying not to forget himself. Do you ever feel time folding in on itself? Like the present and the past are sitting together in the same chair, sharing the same heartbeat? That's how I feel these days. When I correct a student's stance, I see Ned's hands guiding mine. When I tie a wrap, I hear Holmes's slick voice whispering odds and promises. When I write, I feel Tom Sayer's shadow beside me, nodding with approval. They're all still here, just quieter. Evenings are the best time. When the boys have gone home and the lamps burn low, I walk the ring one last time. The boards creak beneath my feet like an old friend acknowledging my steps. I place my cane in the corner and stand in the center, eyes closed, listening. At first, it's silence. Then, faintly, like breath caught in memory, the echo of applause. Not loud, not demanding, just soft enough to remind me it happened. That's all any man can ask for, isn't it? To know he mattered once. That his name, his story, his fight meant something. Even if only to a few who were there to see it. As I leave the gym, I turn down the lamps one by one. The darkness doesn't scare me anymore. Feels honest, like the final bell after a long match. A signal that it's all right to rest now. If you're still awake, listening to my voice drift between these words, ask yourself, what's your quiet ring? The place where you no longer have to fight, where you can simply be. When you find it, don't rush it. Let the silence hold you. It's the truest victory of all. Ink stains have a smell. Sharp, metallic, faintly sweet. like blood that's forgotten to fade. Every time I open a bottle, I catch that scent and think, so this is what memory smells like. Reynolds says writing is a way to trap time. I'm not sure that's true. Time slips through the cracks no matter how tightly you hold the pen. But I do believe that writing slows it. That for a moment, between one word and the next, the world stands still. That's how Champion's journey began. Not as a book, but as a promise. To myself, to the men I'd fought beside. To the younger fighters who'd never know the sting of rain on an open wound beneath the London fog. It started as a letter meant for no one. A few paragraphs scrawled late at night when the tremors wouldn't let me sleep. Then it became a ritual. Every evening after the academy closed, I'd light a candle, open my journal, and chase my memories across the page. Sometimes they came easily. The smell of sawdust and sweat. The sound of Ned's voice calling my name between rounds. The taste of victory, equal parts iron and fear. Other nights, the words refused to come. They hid like old fighters ducking behind guard. I'd sit for hours staring at the paper, hearing only the slow tick of the clock and the faint crackle of the flame. Have you ever tried to write about a life you're still living? It's like trying to catch smoke with bare hands. I sent the first few pages to Reynolds. He wrote back a week later, the letter covered in his tight, careful handwriting. "Jack," he said, "this isn't just memory, it's history. You're not writing for yourself anymore, you're writing for all of us." The thought frightened me. All of us. The weight of those words pressed heavy on my chest. Who was I to speak for a generation of men who'd fought, bled, and vanished? But Reynolds insisted, and slowly my private journal became a manuscript. He visited often in those months. We'd sit by the fire, two men bound by the same obsession. His for understanding, mine for remembering. He'd read passages aloud and I'd interrupt him. "Too clean," I'd say. "Make it dirtier." The ring was never tidy. He laughed once, said, "You're the only man I know who edits honesty into prose." When the book was finally finished, Reynolds arranged for it to be printed under both our names. The day he brought me the first copy, I couldn't bring myself to open it. The cover gleamed with fresh ink. My name looked foreign, almost fictional. I ran my thumb along the edge, and for a moment, it felt like touching a younger version of myself. One still dreaming of glory beneath the gaslight. "Read it," Reynolds urged. So I did. Not all at once, just a page here and there. As if revisiting a house I'd once lived in but no longer owned. The words sounded different when they came from print instead of memory. Colder, quieter, honest, and strangely kind. Do you ever look back at your life and realize it wasn't as cruel as it felt while you were living it? That even the pain in hindsight wears a softer coat? That's what writing does. It forgives what time cannot. The book sold well. More than I expected. Young fighters came to the academy clutching copies, asking me to sign them. Their eyes bright with that same impossible hunger I once had. They'd say, "Mr. Riley, your story inspired me." And I'd smile, though part of me wanted to warn them. Inspiration and warning are often the same thing, just told from opposite ends of time. At night, I keep one copy by my bedside. Not for vanity, for company. When the tremors wake me, I touch the spine and remember. Every bruise, every scar, every fall built the man who wrote these words. Pain was never wasted. It just needed translation. Sometimes, before sleep takes me, I whisper a line from the last chapter. The fight never truly ends. It simply changes arenas. I suppose that's what I've done. Moved from canvas to paper. From punches to sentences. From noise to silence. And maybe you, listening now, are standing somewhere in your own quiet arena, fighting a battle no one else can see. If so, I hope you find your way to write it down, even if no one reads it, even if it's just for you. Because stories, like fighters, survive by being told. There are fights that make your name, and others that save your life. Mine was the one I never stepped into. It was supposed to be against Miller. Yes, that Miller, the man whose fists ended so many careers and nearly ended mine before the bell ever rang. After I retired, he went on to reign for years. When his last challenger fell, he sent word to me through mutual friends. Let's settle what was never finished. For days I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not the violence, I knew what that felt like. But the unfinished story. There's something haunting about leaving a chapter open. You keep wondering what the ending might have been if you turned one more page. Ned heard about it before I told him. He came to my house, cane in hand, expression stormy. "You're not thinking of doing it, are you?" "I'm thinking of it," I said. He slammed his hand on the table. "Thinking's dangerous for old fighters." I laughed then, not from humor but because it was the only sound that could drown the temptation. It's strange, isn't it? The body forgets how to heal long before the heart forgets how to hope. Have you ever been pulled towards something you knew would destroy you, just because part of you missed the person you were when you first wanted it? I told myself I'd only go to watch. The fight was held outside the city, in a meadow near Richmond, where the mist hung low over the grass. When I arrived, I recognized the smell before the sound, that mix of mud, sweat, and cheap tobacco. The crowd looked the same as it always had, rough men with louder hearts than fortunes. They didn't see me at first, just another old spectator leaning on a cane. Then someone whispered my name. It passed through the crowd like a current. Riley, the gentleman bruiser, the old champion. Faces turned. Men nodded. A few even tipped their hats. For a brief, flickering moment I felt it again, that old warmth, the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes believing in you. Miller saw me too. He was broader now, slower around the waist. But his eyes still carried that familiar spark, half respect, half challenge. During the break between rounds he called out, "Wish you'd come back once more, Jack. For old time's sake." I smiled. "We had our time, Bill. You're carrying it well." He grinned, wiped the blood from his mouth, and nodded. That was enough. More than enough. I watched him fight, brutal, beautiful, and heavy with history. Every movement reminded me of what I'd once been and what I'd nearly lost. When it ended, Miller victorious, the crowd roaring, I applauded softly, my palms trembling with the rhythm of the cheers. Then I turned and walked away before anyone noticed the tears. Have you ever left a place knowing it would never see you again, but feeling grateful all the same? That was the walk back to London, long, quiet, and strangely clean inside. I didn't see Miller again for years. When we met by chance later, both older, both limping, he clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You made the right call, Jack." Then he held up his hand, the right one bent and stiff, the knuckles gnarled like roots of an old tree. This is what the ring gave me in the end. I took his hand gently in mine and said, "It gave us both something, didn't it? Just not the same thing." Do you know what it feels like when a ghost forgives you for not dying with it? That's what that handshake was. The papers would later call that fight the passing of an era. For me, it was something quieter. The closing of a door I'd left ajar for far too long. After that night, I never went to another match. Not out of bitterness, but peace. I realized then that every fighter has two final rounds. The one in the ring and the one with himself. If you're lucky, you win the second before the bell. When I returned home, I placed my gloves, old, cracked, and faded, inside a wooden box by the fireplace. Not as trophies, but as prayers. I light a candle beside them sometimes, not for who I was, but for the man who had the courage to stop. If you're listening now, perhaps there's something in your life you've been holding on to. Some fight you no longer need to finish. Let it go. Walk away before it takes more than it's already claimed. There's no shame in survival. Sometimes that's the bravest thing a man can do. The pub was louder than I remembered. Not from music, there was none, but from laughter, the kind that fills a room like smoke. Ned had dragged me there, said it would do my spirits good. He was right. It did. The place was called the Champion's Rest, though most of us knew it by an older name, the Fighting. Same tables. Same smell of ale and sawdust. Different ghosts. I limped in, cane tapping softly on the floorboards. Heads turned, not all of them familiar, but enough to make me feel seen. A few younger men whispered, "That's Riley, isn't it? The old bare-knuckle champion." I pretended not to hear, though I'll admit, the words warmed me like whiskey. In the corner, a group of older fighters sat in a huddle of smoke and memory. There was Jenkins from Bristol, thicker around the waist, but still carrying that crooked grin. Thompson from Liverpool, hands scarred like tree bark. And even old Bennett, who'd once nearly broken my ribs in round 27. He waved me over, that same half-mocking salute I remembered from our fight. "Look who's still standing," he said. "Riley the gentleman." I smiled. Barely. We talked for hours, about the past mostly. About fights we'd won, fights we'd lost, and the ones we pretended not to remember. The air grew heavy with stories. Every tale ended the same way, A laugh, a sigh, or a silence. That's how you know a fighter's truth. It never ends neatly. Have you ever been in a room where everyone knows pain by the same name? It's oddly comforting. We didn't pity one another. We just understood. Bennett spoke about his limp. Thompson showed us his swollen knuckles, still unable to make a proper fist. Jenkins laughed until tears came when someone mentioned his famous nose. Broken twice, flattened once. Then the talk quieted as if someone had lowered an invisible bell over us. No one said it aloud, but we were counting the missing faces. Fighters who hadn't made it this far. You ever wonder, Jenkins murmured, if we'd have done it all again knowing how it ends? The question hung there like smoke. Would I? I thought about the ring, the roar of the crowd, the split second between punch and pain where everything made sense. Then I thought about my knee. About nights spent awake with headaches so deep they hummed. Maybe I nodded. Maybe I didn't. But I remember saying softly, worth it or not, it made us who we are. Ned raised his glass. To survival then. We all lifted ours. Some with shaking hands, some with both hands just to steady the glass. To survival, we echoed. The ale burned warm down my throat. Not victory, not glory, just warmth. It was enough. Later a boy walked in. Barely 20, cheeks still smooth, knuckles wrapped tight. Fresh cuts on his lip, the glow of triumph still burning in his eyes. The crowd welcomed him with cheers, claps, and a few knowing smirks. He'd fought that night, and won. Someone shouted, reminds me of Riley back in the day. The boy turned, searching for me, and when our eyes met, he nodded respectfully. I raised my glass in return. In him, I saw the echo of every fighter who ever believed he could outrun time. Do you remember the first time someone looked at you the way you once looked at your heroes? It's a strange, humbling mirror. You see your youth reflected in someone else's skin, and you realize how far you've traveled since then. The night grew softer as the pub emptied. Only a handful of us remained, talking in whispers now instead of boast. Outside, fog pressed against the windows, and the lamps flickered like tired stars. Ned leaned close, voice raspy with age and ale. You know, Jack, we made it further than most. I smiled. We did. Though I'm not sure where further is anymore. He laughed, low and genuine. Wherever men still remember our names, maybe? When I finally stepped out into the night, the fog wrapped around me like an old friend. The street was quiet. No crowd, no roar, just the soft rhythm of my cane against stone. Each tap sounded like applause fading into the distance. Do you ever feel the world applauding softly for you, even when no one's there? If you listen closely enough, if you've lived fully enough, you might. That night, as I walked home through the mist, I realized something simple. The ring doesn't leave you when you retire. It just follows you quietly, waiting in the shape of memories and laughter. And when the evening crowd toasts your name, it's not to the fighter you were, it's to the man who lived to tell the story. The fog has a way of finding me. Even after all these years, it still creeps through the narrow streets like an old acquaintance. Soft, unhurried, almost kind. I used to hate it. When I was young, fog meant confusion. Now, it feels like a blanket laid over the noise of the world. I wake earlier these days. The body grows impatient before the sun does. Some mornings, I sit by the window of my small study, watching London blur itself into grays and golds. The city moves like a tired animal. I sip tea instead of whiskey now. Age teaches you that warmth comes easier from within than from the bottle. The doctors say my memory is inconsistent. They say it kindly as though it were a compliment. Names slip away. Faces melt into one another like wet paint. But the ring, that I never forget. It lives somewhere deeper than memory, in the rhythm of my heartbeat. Sometimes I find myself shadowboxing without realizing it. A flick of the wrist, a pivot of the foot, a faint tightening of the jaw. Elizabeth catches me and laughs softly. Still fighting ghosts, Jack? Only the friendly ones, I tell her. Have you ever felt time folding over itself? Where yesterday feels nearer than an hour ago. It's strange how memory chooses what to keep. I can recall the sound of the crowd in 1862 clearer than what I had for breakfast. Maybe the heart has its own archive, one the mind can't touch. Reynolds visited last week. His hair's gone completely white, and he walks with a cane not much different from mine. He brought a new edition of the noble art. You're a legend now, Jack, he said with a tired smile. Schoolboys quote your words when they talk about courage. I laughed until my chest ached. Courage? I said. Most of what I did was just stubbornness wearing fancy clothes. But I admit, it's strange to know you've become history while still being alive. I see my name in print, my fights described in careful detail, and I think, that can't possibly be me. I remember too much of the noise, the smell, the fear. History doesn't smell of blood and rain. One night, as I sat alone by the fire, the fog crept under the door again. It filled the room slowly, turning every object into a silhouette. I could almost believe I was back at the old ring, lamps burning through smoke, men shouting, the air thick with sweat and expectation. For a moment I stood. My knees trembled, but in the haze I saw them. Bennett, Jenkins, Ned, even young Miller, all standing in the corners of my room, smiling faintly through the mist. Not haunting me, no. Just watching like brothers who'd gone ahead and saved me a seat. Do you ever dream so vividly that waking feels like the stranger thing? When the fog cleared, they were gone. Only the faint smell of smoke remained. But I didn't feel sad. I felt accompanied. Later that week, Elizabeth found me sitting by the window again. You look peaceful, she said. I was just remembering, I told her. Or maybe forgetting, I can't tell which. She smiled, her hand light on my shoulder. Does it matter? I thought about it, then shook my head. No, I suppose it doesn't. Because that's what aging really is. Not losing your memories, but learning to live with what stays. The fog came again the next night. Thicker this time, heavy as breath against glass. I opened the window and let it in. The cold air wrapped around me, and I could almost hear the muffled thud of gloves again, the steady rhythm that had once been my life. If you're listening now, if you've ever watched your own past drift back like mist over a quiet street, don't chase it. Let it come. Let it settle where it will. The fog only returns to places it remembers fondly. I closed the window at last and whispered into the quiet, I'm still here. And for a moment, I could swear the fog whispered back, so are we. I still remember the first time I heard him say it. Boxing must evolve, Mr. Riley. If it does not, it will perish. Lord Queensberry had a voice that could slice through a ballroom and still sound polite. He believed the sport that shaped men like me could be refined into something noble. I wasn't sure whether to feel honored or offended. He'd invited me to his club, all velvet chairs and portraits of men who'd never known real bruises. He poured brandy like it was a sermon and said, We will write rules, Riley. Gloves, timed rounds, referees. No more bloodbaths for coin. I remember replying quietly, Without the blood, my lord, there'd have been no bread for most of us. He smiled not unkindly. Yes, but perhaps in the future, no one will need to fight for bread. Even then, I think he knew how impossible that dream was. For months, I worked beside him. Me, a battered relic of the bare-knuckle age. Him, a nobleman chasing the illusion of civility in combat. We debated endlessly. He spoke of fairness and safety. I spoke of hunger and heart. Between us, something new was born. The Queensberry rules, they called them. I wrote the early drafts in my uneven hand. No wrestling. Gloves mandatory. 3-minute rounds. 1 minute of rest. I remember pausing after the last line and staring at the paper. It felt like signing a eulogy. Have you ever watched your life's work become something you barely recognize and still felt proud of it? That's how it was. When the first matches under the new rules began, I stood among gentlemen in their tailored coats, listening to polite applause instead of raucous cheers. The fighters wore gloves, crisp and bright as winter apples. No blood on their faces, only sweat. To the crowd it looked graceful. To me it looked distant. Progress, Queensberry whispered beside me. Discipline. I nodded, but inside I felt the faint ache of loss. The art had changed shape. It was safer, yes, but also quieter, smaller. The violence had hidden itself beneath layers of silk. Later that evening, over cigars, he asked, Do you miss it, Jack? The old ways. I smiled. You don't miss a storm once you've built a roof, my lord. But sometimes you miss the sound of the rain. He seemed to like that answer. For all his refinement, Queensberry respected honesty more than flattery. We became unlikely friends. He'd visit the academy, watching my pupils spar with those neat padded gloves. Occasionally he'd take me aside. "Tell me, Mr. Riley, does this truly teach courage?" And I'd answer, "It teaches them to stand. That's where courage starts." It was the truth, even if not the whole of it. As months turned to years, the new sport spread like polished marble over rough ground. Fighters who once swung bare-knuckled now laced up leather. Newspapers began calling it scientific boxing. And the crowds changed too. Less ale, more etiquette. More gentlemen in waistcoats, fewer dock workers with bloody fists. Do you know the feeling of being both proud and obsolete at the same time? It's a peculiar ache, to see what you love survive, but no longer need you to do so. Queensberry once told me, "You, Jack, are proof that progress can honor the past." I never told him that progress, by its nature, forgets what it honors. But maybe he knew. Maybe that was why he worked so tirelessly. Not to erase men like me, but to make sure we'd be remembered before the world forgot our kind. When he died, I attended the funeral. The church was filled with faces from the new generation of boxers. Their gloves pristine, their knuckles unscarred. They bowed their heads and whispered the Lord's Prayer. And I stood there in silence, thinking of the fields and barns where we once fought, the mud underfoot, the blood in our teeth. He turned all that chaos into structure. And somehow that too was an act of courage. As I walked home through the drizzle that evening, the fog rising from the river again, I found myself whispering to the night, "We did it, my lord. We made it safer. Now may they fight with honor enough to deserve it." If you're still awake, ask yourself, what would you give to see your world live on? Even if it had to change beyond recognition to do so? Would you mourn it, or would you smile and let it go? I still haven't decided. Maybe both. Maybe that's the truest kind of peace. There's a certain hush that falls when I enter a room now. Not the kind I knew in the ring, not that pulse of breath before a bell, but something quieter, weightier. Respect, perhaps. Or curiosity. I'm never quite sure which. These days they call me Mr. Riley the writer. It still sounds strange on the tongue. Once, my worth was measured by how well I could strike. Now it's by how carefully I can remember. When the noble art in my columns gained attention, editors began sending letters thick with compliments and contracts. "Your voice, sir, captures the dignity of the old ring." Dignity, they always say that word, as if the blood and mud had ever been dignified. But I play along. There's comfort in the illusion. I lecture now, sometimes in halls grand enough to echo for minutes. Young men in crisp coats sit on polished benches, listening to an old fighter talk about honor, grit, and sportsmanship. They take notes, real notes, as if I'm revealing the secret to some noble art rather than explaining how to survive being hit repeatedly in the face. One evening, after a talk at Oxford, a student approached me. "Mr. Riley," he said shyly, "your stories are incredible. Were you ever afraid?" I looked at him, smooth hands, clear eyes, unscarred skin, and smiled gently. "Always. But I learned to call it something else." He frowned. "What?" "Courage," I said, and his pen froze mid-sentence. "Have you ever told a truth so simple that no one quite believes it? That's what it's like speaking to those boys. They want poetry from my pain, not the plainness of what it cost. Reynolds warned me it would be this way. People prefer the legend, Jack. It's easier to love." He was right. Some evenings, when applause follows my final words, I feel almost invisible inside it, like they're clapping for a ghost that happens to share my name. Still, I can't deny the sweetness of it, the warmth of being wanted. After years of being struck and forgotten, being heard is its own kind of salvation. Elizabeth comes to the readings sometimes. She sits near the back, hands folded neatly in her lap. When our eyes meet across the hall, I see the same steady affection she's always had for me, neither dazzled nor distant, just quietly proud. Afterward, she teases, "You sounded almost respectable tonight." "Almost?" I ask. She grins. "You let one swear word slip in Latin. I've grown to love the rhythm of writing, the scratch of the nib, the way ink blooms on paper like thought made visible. There's power in choosing words instead of punches. But sometimes when the sentences flow too easily, I wonder if I've started inventing the past instead of recalling it. Memory, after all, is just storytelling without an audience. Do you ever question your own memories? Whether they belong to you, or to the person the world believes you are. It's a quiet sort of fight, the kind that leaves no bruises, only a soft ache behind the ribs. Last month, a publisher sent me a letter. They want a collection of my essays compiled into a book. Reflections of a Champion. A fine title, I suppose, though I told Elizabeth. It sounded like a funeral written by a polite man. She laughed and said, "Then write it yourself before someone else does." She's right, as she usually is. If I don't tell my story honestly, someone else will tidy it into myth. And I owe the truth to the boys who still fight, and to the man I once was. So, at night, after she's asleep, I light a small lamp and write until the candle gutters out. Sometimes I write to the living, sometimes to the dead. To Ned, who taught me heart. To Queensbury, who taught me restraint. To Miller, who taught me mercy. And to the nameless crowds who once cheered me loud enough to make me believe I mattered. If you're listening now, perhaps you've also built something from pain. A story, a song, a quiet strength you rarely show. If so, keep building. Ink fades slower than scars. When dawn comes, I blow out the lamp, stretch my stiff fingers, and smile at the page. Somewhere in those lines, the fighter still breathes, gentler now, but undefeated. Autumn arrived without announcement this year. One morning I woke to find the world changed. The air crisp, the trees gilded, London dressed in shades of old gold. Even the fog seemed gentler, as if it too were tired of being heavy. Elizabeth says I walk slower these days. She's right. But it's not just the knee. It's because every street now feels like a memory, and I can't help stopping to greet them all. I take the same path each morning, past the academy, past the tailor's shop where my first gloves were sewn, and down toward the river, where the wind smells faintly of iron and salt. The water carries reflections of a city that never sits still. It's strange, London ages but never grows old. People do. Once the city made me feel young and hungry. Now it feels like an old friend walking beside me. Both of us limping a little, both pretending not to notice. Do you ever look at the place you grew up and feel like it remembers you, even when you've forgotten pieces of yourself? That's how London feels to me now. Like a mirror that still holds the face I used to wear. Along the way, I pass a group of boys boxing in the alley behind a bakery. No gloves, no referee, just bare fists and wild laughter. I stop, leaning on my cane, watching their raw, awkward movements. They haven't learned control yet. They're all instinct and heart. When one notices me, he freezes mid-swing. "Sir," he stammers, "you're Jack Riley, aren't you?" I smile. "I was once." He grins shyly. "We've read about you in the noble art. Our teacher says you made boxing what it is today." I chuckle. "If that's true, then you boys are keeping it alive." He looks confused for a moment, then nods, proud as any young fighter should be. I give him a small piece of advice. Learn how to fall well. It's the only thing you'll need all your life. They laugh, not understanding, and go back to swinging at each other, the sound of youth filling the cold morning. When I turn to leave, I realize my eyes have blurred, not from tears, but from the soft ache of recognition. Every generation thinks it's inventing courage for the first time. Perhaps that's what keeps the world alive. I stop by the river next. The Thames moves slow and heavy, the way I do now. Its surface shimmers with the last of the sunlight, each ripple catching a fragment of the city's light. 1,000 tiny memories breaking, reforming, and floating away. I toss a pebble into the water and watch it disappear. It's foolish, but I whisper after it, for the ones who never got their second chance. Have you ever spoken to the past out loud? You don't expect an answer, but sometimes the silence feels like understanding. By the time I head home, the sky has turned the color of cooling embers. Leaves spiral in the wind, each one falling with quiet grace. So different from the way we fall in life, but somehow the same in spirit. When I reach our gate, Elizabeth is waiting, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "You've been gone for hours," she says. "Long enough to remember everything and forget half of it," I tell her. She smiles, takes my arm, and leads me inside. We dine by the fire that evening. The room smells of wood smoke and baked apples. For a long while, neither of us speaks. It's a comfortable silence, the kind you earn after years of noise. As I sit there, I think of the road I walked today, the boys in the alley, the river's slow song, the city breathing beneath its coat of gold, and I realize something simple. I no longer walk to escape my past. I walk to keep it company. If you're listening now, maybe you have your own autumn, a season when things slow down, when every sound seems softer, when every goodbye feels like a form of gratitude. Don't rush through it. Let the air grow cool around you. Let it remind you that even endings can be beautiful. As I rise to put another log on the fire, a leaf slips through the open window, drifting to rest beside my chair. I pick it up, turn it over in my hand, and whisper to the quiet room, even the fall can be gentle. It was tucked between old ledgers and training notes. A single folded page, yellowed around the edges, sealed but never sent. My handwriting stared back at me, slanted and urgent, as if written in a hurry by a man afraid of changing his mind. The date in the corner stopped me. 1864. That was the year after I'd retired. The year I first learned how to sit still. I ran my thumb across the wax seal, cracked, fragile, and hesitated. Some things once opened never close again. Elizabeth found me sitting there, the letter trembling slightly between my fingers. "Another fan writing to you?" she asked with a soft smile. "Other way around," I murmured. She knew better than to press. She kissed my temple and left the room in quiet understanding. When I finally broke the seal, the scent of old paper and dust rose like memory uncoiling. It was addressed to Ned Clark, my oldest friend, the man who'd seen me through every victory and every ruin. He'd been gone for years now, buried in the churchyard of St. Pancras, the earth above him worn smooth by time. I began to read. "Ned, I know you'll say I'm being sentimental, but something tells me we won't see each other much longer. I've been thinking about what we gave to the ring, and what it took in return. I used to believe the fight made me who I am, but lately I think it just showed me who I already was. Stubborn, reckless, hungry for more than I could hold. You once said the worst pain isn't in the body, it's in learning when to stop. I understand that now. If I never told you proper, thank you. For teaching me how to keep standing. For being the voice that kept me human when the crowd wanted something else. If this finds you before I do, pour one for me at the fighting. I'll be there in spirit, somewhere between the noise and the silence." The letter ended there, no signature, no farewell. Just that half promise hanging like a punch that never landed. I folded it again, hands trembling not from age but from recognition. I'd written those words when pride still held me back from speaking them aloud. By the time I might have had the courage, it was too late. Have you ever realized that the truest things you felt were the ones you never said? It's a quiet ache, not regret exactly, more like a shadow that follows even in sunlight. I placed the letter on my desk, beside a clean sheet of paper and my old fountain pen. The ink flowed unevenly now, but it still obeyed me. And I began to write, not to Ned this time, but to all the people who'd passed through my life, and left their mark without asking anything in return. To Reynolds for giving my memories a home. To Queensbury for giving the sport a future. To Elizabeth for giving me peace. And to the boys who still throw their fists into the air, believing as I once did, that victory could make them whole. I didn't finish the new letter that night. I didn't need to. Some things are meant to remain open, like a window left ajar for the soul to breathe. When Elizabeth came to check on me, she found me staring at the candlelight flickering on the paper. "Who's this one for?" she asked softly. "For whoever needs to hear it," I said. She smiled. "Then I hope they do. I think about that sometimes. How words can outlive us if we let them. How even a letter never sent still carries weight, like an unopened door that someone somewhere might still walk through. If you're listening now, maybe there's someone you've been meaning to write to. Someone who shaped you quietly. Someone whose name still hums behind your thoughts. Don't wait as long as I did. Even a few words. Thank you, I remember, I forgive you, can reach farther than you think." The next morning, I placed Ned's letter back where I found it, but this time not hidden. I left it on the shelf above my desk, where sunlight touches it in the afternoon. Feels right there. Not a secret anymore, but a small monument to what was left unsaid. As I closed the study door behind me, I whispered, "See you at the fighting, old friend." And for a moment, I swear I heard a faint chuckle in the stillness, gravelly, familiar, as if Ned himself had just raised his glass one more time. It was raining that afternoon, not the wild kind of rain that lashes against the glass, but the soft, whispering sort that London saves for old men and quiet thoughts. Elizabeth had gone to visit her sister, and I'd been dozing in my chair by the fire, half dreaming, half remembering. Then came the knock. 3 gentle raps. Measured, polite. Not the sound of a stranger, but of someone who knows exactly how much force to use. For a moment I thought I'd imagined it, but it came again. I rose slowly, the knee protesting, the cane clicking against the floorboards, and opened the door. There he stood, a young man barely 30, his coat soaked, his hair clinging to his forehead. He looked nervous, not frightened, just uncertain, the way one looks before saying something rehearsed 100 times. "Mr. Riley?" His voice was low, respectful. "I hope I'm not intruding. My name's Thomas Clark." The name stopped me cold. "Clark." He noticed the flicker in my eyes and nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." Ned Clark was my grandfather. I stared at him for a long moment, as if the name had conjured a ghost and given it flesh. "Come in," I said finally. "You're just in time, I was about to pour the tea." He smiled, the same crooked half-smile Ned used to wear when he thought I was talking nonsense, and stepped inside. We sat by the fire, steam curling from our cups. The rain pressed softly against the windows. He looked around the room, the framed sketches, the old gloves in their wooden box, the candlelit calm that had become my world. "My grandfather spoke of you often," he said, "though I was young when he passed. He said you were the only man who could argue with him and still make him laugh." I chuckled. "That sounds like him. He'd argue with the sun for rising too early." Thomas's smile faded into something more thoughtful. "He left something for you. My father kept it for years, but, well, time got away from us. When I found it last month, I thought, if you were still alive, you'd want to see it." From inside his coat, he produced a small parcel wrapped in oilcloth. I unfolded it slowly, my hands trembling just slightly. Inside lay a tarnished pocket watch. Old, heavy, the kind men carried into the ring back when time was measured in rounds, not minutes. I turned it over. The back was engraved, "To Riley, for the fight that never ended." For a moment I couldn't speak. The rain outside seemed to pause, the room holding its breath with me. "I remember this," I whispered. "He showed it to me once years ago. Said it kept better time than either of us." Thomas smiled softly. "He said it reminded him you'd never lost a round that mattered." That broke me a little. Not in sorrow, but in that quiet, aching way you feel when someone has remembered you kindly after you've long stopped expecting to be remembered at all. We sat there for a while, saying little. The fire crackled, the clock on the mantel ticked gently, and somewhere deep inside, the past shifted and settled into place. After some time, Thomas asked, "Did you ever miss it, the fighting, I mean?" I considered the question carefully, rolling the watch in my palm, feeling the cold metal grow warm. "Sometimes," I said, "but not the pain. It's the noise I miss, the sound of life happening all at once." He nodded, understanding far beyond his years. "I box a bit myself," he admitted shyly. "Not for money, just the discipline. Grandfather said it teaches a man who he really is." I smiled. He was right. "But remember, the real fight's never with the man in front of you. It's with the one in the mirror." We talked until dusk. When he finally rose to leave, he hesitated at the doorway. "I think he'd be happy to know you still remember him," he said quietly. "I never stopped," I replied. He nodded, tipped his hat, and disappeared into the rain. When the door closed behind him, I sat back down, the watch ticking softly in my hand. Its rhythm matched the rain on the windows. Steady, patient, eternal. Have you ever felt time itself forgive you? That's what it felt like, as if all those unfinished goodbyes had finally found their way home. That night, before I went to bed, I wound the watch and set it on my nightstand. Its small golden face caught the firelight, and for the first time in many years, I slept without dreaming of the ring. The letter arrived on thick cream paper, the kind used by men who still sign their names with fountain pens. It bore the crest of the Royal Sporting Society. Inside, written in an elegant hand, were the words, "Mr. Jack Riley, we would be honored if you would attend our exhibition of champions, celebrating the greats of the prize ring. Your presence would lend the occasion its rightful dignity." Dignity. That word again. For men who bled for applause, dignity always seemed to arrive late. Elizabeth was delighted. "You must go," she insisted. "It's your story they're honoring." I smiled, though a part of me whispered, "No, it's your ghost they're inviting." Still I went. The exhibition was held at the new athletic hall near Hyde Park, a grand structure of iron and glass, filled with light like a cathedral. Everywhere I looked there were faces. Fighters, promoters, noblemen, and young journalists with notebooks poised like swords. Portraits lined the walls, painted, polished, heroic. Some of the names beneath them had once been shouted beside mine. Others I'd only ever known by reputation. Men who'd come after, wearing gloves I'd helped make necessary. When I entered, the room stirred, a ripple moving through the crowd. "Mr. Riley," someone said reverently, and the murmur spread like the hush before the first bell. A young reporter rushed forward, barely older than I'd been when I first laced up. "Sir, may we have your words on what it means to see your legacy preserved?" I looked around the hall, at the gleaming displays, the tidy rows of trophies, the neatly printed captions beneath artifacts that had once dripped with blood and sweat. "My legacy," I said slowly, "was written in the mud long before it was framed in gold." He blinked, unsure if that was poetry or confession, then scribbled it down anyway. "Do you ever stand in a place that used to define you and realize it no longer needs you? It's not sadness exactly, more like relief in disguise." Lord Queensberry's portrait hung near the entrance. I paused before it, bowing my head slightly. He'd lived long enough to see his dream take hold. A civilized sport for a civilized age. And though I had my doubts, I couldn't deny the beauty of it. The symmetry, the precision, the clean lines of progress. It was as though we'd all been fighting not for belts, but for time itself, to carve out a place where brutality could become grace. Then I saw it, in the center of the hall, under soft light, my own portrait. I hardly recognized the man. The artist had captured me young, proud, eyes fierce but unafraid. Beside it, under glass, lay the gloves from my last official bout. The fabric worn thin, the leather cracked like parchment. I stared at them for a long time, until the reflections in the glass blurred into my own face. Elizabeth appeared at my side, her gloved hand finding mine. "They've remembered you well," she whispered. "Better than I deserve," I replied. She squeezed my hand. "No, Jack. Exactly as you deserve." A hush fell over the crowd as the master of ceremonies took the stage. He spoke of courage, of legacy, of the noble spirit of the ring. Then, to my surprise, he called my name. The audience turned. The applause began softly, then grew, filling the hall like the sea returning to shore. Men stood. Even the young fighters clapped until their palms reddened. I stepped forward, each tap of my cane echoing louder than the applause itself. At the podium I paused. The lights were bright, too bright, and for a moment I could almost see the outlines of all the men who'd come before me, standing quietly in the wings. "I thank you," I began. "My generation fought for many things, some noble, some foolish, but we fought with everything we had. If these hands taught the world anything, I hope it's that courage isn't loud. It's the quiet decision to stand up again, even when no one's watching." The hall was silent. Then slowly the applause returned. Not the roaring kind I remembered, but softer, deeper, like rain on an old roof. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, one of the younger boxers approached me. He was nervous, eyes shining. "Sir," he said, "I hope to fight half as bravely as you did." I smiled. "Then fight twice as kindly as I ever could." That night, as Elizabeth and I rode home through the mist, she rested her head on my shoulder. "You looked happy up there," she said. "I was," I told her, "but not for the reason they think." She looked up. "Then why?" "Because I finally realized the fight isn't over. It just found new hands to carry it. If you're still listening, perhaps there's something in your life that's passed from your hands to another's. Let it. The truest victories are the ones that outlive us." The house is quiet tonight. Even the clock seems to tick more softly, as if afraid to disturb whatever thought I'm nursing in this stillness. Elizabeth has gone to bed. The fire burns low, casting slow-moving light across the old photographs on the mantel. Faces from long ago, some smiling, some solemn, each one holding a fragment of the man I used to be. Outside, the rain has returned, a steady rhythm against the windows. It sounds almost like applause, distant, forgiving. Funny, isn't it? How even the weather remembers better than people sometimes do. The doctor came by earlier. He's a kind man, though he looks at me with the same expression people reserve for museum pieces. Respectful but already mourning. He told me to rest, to stay warm, to let the world turn without me for a while. As if I hadn't been doing that for years. I don't feel unwell, not really. Just lighter. As though the body is slowly stepping aside to make room for memory. On the table beside me lies Ned's watch. It ticks faintly, stubborn as ever. Sometimes I hold it to my ear and imagine I'm hearing the heartbeat of an old friend. Tonight it feels different. Not slower, but steadier, as if keeping pace with something unseen. I think often of the ring these days, but not the fighting. The moments just before the bell. That breathless hush. The air thick with possibility. Every sound stretched thin until the first strike broke it open. That silence was always my favorite part. The world balanced perfectly between calm and chaos. Perhaps this night feels like that. The quiet before something larger than victory or defeat. Do you ever sense when a chapter is about to close? Not with fear, but with a kind of peace that feels older than your own bones? That's how it feels now. Elizabeth's voice drifts softly from the bedroom. A hum, almost a lullaby. She sings when she thinks I'm asleep. Sometimes I wonder if she's singing for me or for herself. Either way, the sound finds me, wraps around me like a warm hand in the dark. On the mantel, one of the photos tilts slightly. The one from the academy's early days. I stand in the middle, surrounded by my students. They're all gone now, scattered by time. But I still remember their laughter, their hope, their trembling hands wrapping gloves for the first time. The world moves on, but pieces of us linger in the people we've taught. That, I think, is how immortality really works. I close my eyes for a moment and imagine walking into that old gym again. The boards creaking, the air thick with chalk and sweat. I can hear Ned shouting from the corner, "Keep your guard high, Riley." And I almost want to laugh, because I still do, even now. When I open my eyes again, the room feels gentler somehow, as if every shadow knows my name. I pour a small measure of whiskey, not for the pain, but for the company. I lift it toward the firelight and whisper, to the ones who never made it to this quiet. The first sip burns, but the second feels like memory, warm, fading, familiar. I think about the boys who fight now, their gloves polished, their matches civilized. They'll never know what the old ring took from us, but they'll never have to. That's progress, I suppose. Reynolds once told me, "Jack, every man fights one final round, and he never knows when it begins." Maybe this is mine. Not a fight of fists or fury, but of letting go gracefully. If you're still listening, if my voice has followed you into the edge of sleep, remember this. The world always rings the final bell. You just have to be ready to drop your hands and bow when it comes. I lean back, feeling the warmth of the fire seep into my bones. The watch ticks steadily beside me, counting not the seconds, but the distance between heartbeats. In the quiet, I murmur to no one in particular, "It's been a good fight." And as I close my eyes, I imagine that old wooden ring again. The crowd fading, the fog rolling in, and somewhere far away, a bell rings. Clear, soft, final. Morning arrives softly, like a glove brushing the cheek of the world. The rain has stopped. The streets glisten, washed clean. And the air, that tender, breathless air of London, carries the faintest scent of coal smoke and roses. Elizabeth wakes first. She calls my name once, gently, as she's done every morning for the last 20 years. When I don't answer, she doesn't cry right away. She just stands there for a long time, listening to the quiet, watching the slow flicker of the fire that has burned itself to embers. The watch on the table still ticks, steady and unbothered. It does not know that its keeper has stepped away. It keeps time the way a river keeps flowing, because that's what time was made to do. Later that day, Reynolds comes. Older now, his hair thin and his steps uneven, but his voice still sure. He stands by my chair, his hand resting on the back of it as though I might still be sitting there. "Always stubborn, old friend," he murmurs. "Couldn't wait for the sunrise, could you?" He finds the half-written letter on my desk. The ink faded but legible. The last line reads, "We never stop fighting, we just learn to fight gently." He folds the paper carefully, placing it inside the first edition of the noble art. A book within a book, a life within a life. Elizabeth arranges the room with quiet grace. No morning cloth, no heavy drapes, just light. She opens the window, and the morning air rushes in like a blessing. On the mantel, beside my photograph, She places Ned's watch, still ticking. That evening, friends and students gather at the Fighting, the old pub that outlived every man who ever bled on its floorboards. They drink not to sorrow, but to memory. Bennett's nephew raises a glass and says, "He taught my uncle to block with honor, and to fall with dignity." Someone adds, "He taught us all that pain isn't the opposite of grace." The laughter that follows is low and fond, the kind that sits deep in the chest. Outside, the fog rolls in again, thick and familiar. Someone swears they hear footsteps just beyond the doorway, and for a moment the room grows still. But it's only the wind, or maybe it isn't. Days turn to weeks, and the world continues as it always has. The Academy holds a memorial exhibition. Fighters, young and old, taking turns in the ring, their gloves glinting under soft lamplight. They fight not to win, but to remember what it means to try. A boy of 16, lean and eager, steps into the ring wearing a crimson sash around his waist, the same color I once wore. Before the first bell, his trainer leans close and whispers, "Keep your guard high and your heart higher." The boy nods, his breath steady, his eyes bright. When the bell rings, it sounds like the beginning of everything. Have you ever noticed that legacy doesn't shout? It whispers, in gestures, in habits, in a boy's careful stance, in the rhythm of a city that keeps breathing after you've gone. Reynolds' book goes through a new printing that year. In the preface he writes, "Jack Riley lived the way he fought, with patience, courage, and mercy. He showed that true strength lies not in striking, but in knowing when to lower one's hands." The final bell does not end the fight. It merely signals peace. Elizabeth keeps a copy on her nightstand. Sometimes she reads a few lines aloud before bed, not out of sadness, but because the sound of my name still feels like home. The years pass quietly. The world changes again. New rules, new champions, new ways of measuring victory. But every so often, in a pub, a ring, or a classroom, someone mentions my name. And for a moment, it's as if the air itself pauses to listen. If you're hearing my story now, perhaps it means that the fight, my fight, our fight, still echoes somewhere. Maybe you've carried it without even realizing. Maybe every time you choose kindness over pride, every time you rise after falling, you ring that same invisible bell. The world forgets quickly, but not completely. Somewhere a clock still ticks. Somewhere rain still falls softly on an empty gym. And somewhere in the quiet between breaths, a voice says, "It's been a good fight."